Is the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini enough to edit projects in DaVinci Resolve Studio? I want to find out what are the limitations of the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini, and is it sufficient for your content creation workflows in DaVinci Resolve Studio? I started this video back when the M3 line was just a rumor. I was wondering if in late 2023 going on into 2024, if the M2 Pro Mac Mini is still a good buy. The Mac upgrade cycle is pretty insane right now, but I think the dust has settled a bit, and I'm pretty sure we're confined to MacBooks and the iMac for the M3 lineup for the rest of the year, right? Apple? The whole M3 lineup is very confusing. There's some odd things going on with that. It makes it hard to understand if you're actually getting much of an upgrade over M2 or even M1 for that matter, depending on which M3 you're looking at. In this video, I wanted to see how well does the M2 Pro Mac Mini work in DaVinci Resolve. So I'm gonna show you some real world examples, what it's like to edit projects in DaVinci Resolve. I'm also gonna compare it to my Windows computer, which is much more expensive and much more powerful, mostly to show you what you actually get for extra money spent on an editing computer. I'm gonna run some benchmarks just so that we can see like where are we at in terms of raw computing power between these two machines. Benchmarks are only going to tell you just that, how fast the computer is, how it handles sustained workloads, et cetera, and it's going to spit out a number. The numbers on the Windows computer are going to be much higher than the numbers on the M2 Pro Mac Mini, but then we're going to get into some more real-world examples of what it's like to work in DaVinci Resolve, and there you're going to see that those benchmarking numbers don't tell you the whole story. The first benchmark I wanted to show is Cinebench 2024. This is the brand new version of Cinebench, and it's been optimized to take advantage of Apple Silicon. This is just the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini, the 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of unified memory, and the 512 gigabyte SSD. This model retails for $1299 in the United States. My Windows computer is a completely custom-built computer. It has the Intel i9 13900K. It's got the RTX 4080 graphics card with 16 gigs of video memory. It has a total of 6 terabytes of internal PCIe Gen 4 NVMe storage. It's got 64 gigs of RAM. Windows and Mac OS are completely up to date, and I'm also running the latest, up-to-datest version of Resolve. Cinebench also has a GPU optimized test, and this one is hilarious because the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080 running CUDA scored a 25,794. And the Apple M2 Pro running Metal scored 2,614. Next, I wanted to run some disk speed tests. On the Mac, I ran the Blackmagic Design disk speed test, and on the Windows computer, I ran the Crystal Disk Mark bench because the Blackmagic Design disk speed test isn't available on Windows as far as I know. One of the big disappointments with the M2 Pro Mac Mini, or with a lot of the M2 machines, was if you get the lower capacity hard drive, in this case on the M2 Pro Mac Mini that I have, it's the 500 gigabyte, it actually is a much slower drive. So you're seeing that borne out here on the disk speed test, where write speeds are somewhere around 2350, read speeds are around 2565. Whereas if you were to get at least the 1 terabyte internal drive, those speeds are likely going to be double that, if not more. In comparison to the C drive on my Windows machine, that is getting reads of about 6941 and writes of 6,152. So about 3 times faster than the internal drive of the M2 Pro Mac Mini. The cool thing about the Blackmagic disk speed test is that it shows you how your drive will perform in various codecs: Blackmagic Raw, ProRes 422HQ, and H.265. So obviously, even with these slower speeds, they are well above the requirements to meet these different codecs at all of these different resolutions. However, you only have 500 gigabytes of internal storage, so you're probably going to need to supplement that with external drives. And one issue that I've run into with the Apple Silicon is in using external drives like these SanDisk drives that I use, you will not get the full speed of these drives plugged into the Thunderbolt ports on the backs of these computers. I think these drives are USB 3.2 Gen 2 and not Thunderbolt 4 drives. The SanDisk Extreme Pro 1 terabyte, which is what I use to store all my footage and work from, I'm only getting about 918 writes and about 930 reads, but this drive is rated for well over 1,000 reads and writes. we're still getting more than enough speed out of this drive to work in all of these codecs and all of these resolutions. The only thing that it's showing as an X is 12K DCI 60 in ProRes 422 HQ. I think you'll be good. Again, just in comparison to the footage drive that I have installed in my Windows computer, which is that same WD Black SN850X, but 4 terabytes, that's getting almost 7,000 megabits per second reads and about 6,600 writes. Last little benchmark I wanted to run is the Blackmagic Raw speed test. So this is actually just testing the ability of the CPU and the GPU to handle Blackmagic Raw in various compressions, 12:1, 8:1, 5:1, and 3:1 at resolutions from HD all the way up to 8K. The Mac Mini is holding up pretty well. It's going to struggle apparently in resolutions. Well, these are weird resolutions. 3456p at 50 and 60 frames per second, and 4320p at 50 and 60 frames per second. Most of the footage that you'll be working with and most of the resolutions you'll be working with, you should be covered with the M2 Pro Mac Mini. The benchmark results might be a little bit disheartening if you are pulling for the M2 Pro Mac Mini. But one thing to keep in mind is not only is the Windows machine much more expensive than this M2 Pro, but it's also requiring so much more power, so much more wattage pulled from the wall, and generating so much more heat than the M2 Pro is to do the same workflows. Another benefit of that is the M2 Pro is essentially silent. It's very rare that you'll ever hear the fans spin up. In contrast, the Windows machine is always audible. I can always hear the fans whirring away in the background, even if it's mostly idle. And then if it's doing anything intensive, then the fans ramp up even louder and it sounds like it's trying to enter low Earth orbit. These are all benchmarks. So how is it to actually work in projects in DaVinci Resolve Studio? I'll show you some projects that I've actually edited in Resolve. So they're not just random clips that are thrown on a timeline. They're actually full projects. Most of them are pretty simple because who's got time to have crazy complex edits when you're just trying to crank out videos? This one is extremely simple. It is mostly just one talking head clip with the audio coming right from that camera. There are a couple of B-roll clips put on top, but this is definitely the simplest type of timeline that I will have here. Timeline proxy resolution is set to full. These clips are from the Sony a7S III, and they were captured in XEVC HS, which is the H.265 codec within the camera at 422 10-bit at 23.976 at 3840 by 2160. So that's the footage we're working with here. Just a couple of clips again with some text on top, and that was all captured from the a7S III as well. I also generated a subtitle in order to use just some text overlaid on the screen. Okay, that's enough preamble. Let's just look at what's it like to play this back. You can see we're getting 23.976 playback. If I just jump around, so just hitting the down arrow to jump to the next clip, it has no issue immediately skipping forward. There's no drop frames or anything like that. So that's all very fast. Now I'm gonna hit the L key, so now we're in 2x playback. Also, no problems whatsoever. And then hitting it again in 4x playback, 4x speed. All that works, no problem. Okay, so there is, you could probably see that struggling here, there is a little glow transition. You can also see at the top, this is turning blue. So I apparently have the render cache enabled. So that's another thing, that's the computer's actually rendering this cache as I am playing this back. So that's definitely taking some processing power. And then of course it rendered that transition and now it has no problems playing that back. I also should let you know that I'm doing the screen recording in OBS on the M2 Pro Mac Mini currently. So that is definitely taking some of the resources of the computer. That's just the best way I have to actually capture. But there's nothing else running on the Mac Mini aside from Resolve and OBS. So all that looks good. All that is playing back just fine. Jumping over into Fairlight, I also do have a couple of things enabled. I have the voice isolation. This is a pretty heavy effect. It will tax the CPU. And so that's running, and then I've just got a little bit of compressor and the limiter going, and also some equalization, but nothing too crazy. But that voice isolation effect can hamper the playback, but you can see here that we're not getting any issues playing any of this back. Coming over here to the timeline view options. I've also have it rendering out these thumbnails all the way across these clips, which is something that I don't typically do because I do think that takes up system resources that's kind of unnecessary. I usually have mine set to this, so it's just a thumbnail on the beginning and the end of a clip. I think that helps out in the playback department if you either have this enabled or just no thumbnails whatsoever. Let me just go ahead and make some cuts on here. Like if I wanted to just trim this up, say to here, I can hit the trim edit button, and then maybe I'll trim up the end of that clip there. But let's just say I want to cut that part. If you're not following what I'm doing, I'm going to make a cut right here where the playhead is, and then I'm going to trim everything to the right of it by hitting that key. It's all very snappy, very smooth, no issues making these little simple edits on the timeline. Okay, so there's one example. And if we go to the Deliver tab, this project, which is just under 8 minutes long, when I rendered it, it completed in 8 minutes and 43 seconds. So just over the actual runtime of the video. But I did have Dehancer enabled for the actual export. I bet if I rendered this out without Dehancer, I bet it's gonna fly through. So let me do that. Let me just show you. You'll hear me refer to Dehancer a couple times later on in the video. So I just wanted to clear that up because I edited it out and it might not make sense exactly what I'm referring to, but I wanted to disable it because it's not something that I would expect the vast majority of people to be utilizing. But you can see on this render time here, when I did have Dehancer enabled on my timeline, that the Mac Mini took an extra 3 or 4 minutes to render that video with Dehancer effects enabled versus the Windows computers. My export settings, I'll use QuickTime, but instead of H.264, I like to use H.265. And then for quality, restrict to, I'll usually set this to 60,000. And for advanced settings, since we already do have some render cache, I'm going to use render cached images. And then for audio, all that looks fine. And then we're going to normalize this to YouTube. And we'll add this to render queue and we'll see how long this takes to render. And we're back. So turning off the Dehancer node on the vast majority of clips here reduced the render time quite substantially. So from 8:43 down to 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I typically use the AV1 encoder because it's enabled on the NVIDIA GPUs. Otherwise, all the settings are pretty much the same as what I would do on the Mac Mini. Of course, when I rendered this out, I did have the Dehancer plugin. Let me do another render to match what we did on the Mac Mini. I completed in 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Some of the other Resolve specific things you can do, like generate subtitles. So how long does that take? Coming up to timeline, and we're gonna create subtitles from audio, and we're gonna hit create and start. Oh, that took almost a minute, 59 seconds. Here's some shorts that I worked on. So similar A7S3 FX30 footage, same codecs, H.265, 422 10-bit. It's got a full subtitle track going across the top of it, but there's also, here's some iPhone footage. This is the kind of footage that really any computer is gonna struggle with, is highly compressed footage from an iPhone, stuff from the GoPro, that kind of footage. And you can see it's definitely slowing down on this section here, but that is a lot of layers as well as just that footage happening. So it's got the iPhone footage and the FX30 footage and a text layer and a solid color, all that going on at the same time, but it's still managing it pretty well. It started out at like 10.9 frames, so it took about half of that clip section before it was able to jump up to 23.976, but I don't really think it's actually playing back in real time because you can just see that it looks a little bit choppy. A lot of it depends on the codec you're using. You can see how the iPhone footage is particularly difficult to edit, but that's going to be the case on any computer. Jumping over to the Deliver tab, you can see that these edits took 20 seconds. So these are obviously shorts that are under a minute, 55 seconds long, and it flew through these exports in about 20 seconds. What if you want to use some of the more intensive GPU-enabled effects, like the Magic Mask? For instance, I've used the Magic Mask to mask out the person in the foreground to put the text behind him. I'm going to hit Option / and try to loop this real quick and see. Okay, there we go. So it kind of plays and then it gets stuck when it gets to the end and goes crazy for a minute. It's not terrible. Oh, this is already in quarter resolution. Just keep that in mind. We're already rendering this out in quarter resolution, and that's the kind of playback that we're getting. So I did this in the color page. I'm gonna just jump over to the color page real quick. I'm gonna redo it just so we can see how long it takes to actually do the magic mask. So let's reset that. I'm just gonna hit the dropper and just start drawing onto subject here. Just scribble them in a little bit. Whoops, kind of went overboard. So it already made the selection. My experience is you want to use better unless it's something that's super simple. It just works better, obviously. So now we're going to track this. We're already at the beginning frame, so I'm just track this forward and we'll see how long this takes to track. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. 19 seconds, almost 20 seconds. We'll round down. Obviously we're still in quarter resolution, so it's a little blurry, but let's go back out to the timeline and see how it looks. So there's the magic mask, or there's an application of the magic mask, and it's pretty doable. So here we are on the Windows computer. Let's see magic mask. We're gonna jump over into color page, and I'm gonna reset the magic mask because it's not currently working. I'm gonna go over to better, and we're gonna need to track forward and back because I wasn't on the first frame. So let me get my stopwatch, and here we go. That only took about 9 seconds. So 10 seconds faster to apply the magic mask. So let's jump back over here and see what it's like to play this back. Okay, there we go. So just playing it back, working fine. No real slowdowns, starts right up, and that is at full resolution. So impressive win for the Windows computer, but not surprising. What about the Relight effect? Okay, so here is the surface map for the Relight, and then here is the actual Relight. Quarter resolution, Relight applied, 4 frames per second. What's it like to actually mess with the parameters? So coming to the brightness slider, you can see that you're actually getting the preview in more or less real time as you adjust the parameters. And that to me is super important. If you're trying to apply an effect, you need to be able to see what it's doing. If you're trying to adjust an effect and you're having to wait and wait and wait and wait just to see what it's actually doing, that's kind of the difference between like using the effect and not even bothering using the effect. So this is exactly what we had on the Mac. We've got the Relight 1, which generates the surface map, and then the Relight 2, which actually applies the effect. So let's just play it and see what kind of frame rate we're getting. So this is playing at 15 frames per second. And remember that we're already at full resolution. If I go down to quarter resolution like we had on the Mac Mini, doesn't really change too much. It gives us an extra 3 frames. Let's jump over to noise reduction. So this is one that's going to be super common for a lot of people to use, but it's also a very intensive GPU heavy application. I just have it on temporal NR, 2 frames, faster, medium, and then the Luma and Chroma set up to 9.9, so that's not very much. And then over here in spatial, I have it set to better, and then Luma and Chroma set to 10.8. So let's see what we have here. We are in quarter resolution playback still, which isn't something that I would typically do working in the color page. I would want to have full resolution. It takes a few frames to get spun up, but otherwise it's doing okay. But let's put it into full resolution and see what happens. A huge difference, obviously. 4 frames per second with noise reduction applied to the footage. Got the same exact settings as we had on the Mac Mini. The LCD of the camera, if you need to do that for some reason, and you can actually record 22, what is 21. On the so not LCD full speed, of the camera, almost full speed. And again, that's at full resolution. If you need to do that for some reason, that you can actually record. A couple of other Resolve Studio effects that you can add in the color page. I've got glow, halation, and grain. If I play this back, at full resolution, we're getting 13 frames per second. This, to me, is still totally workable. You can see the image well, you're getting playback. That's not too bad. Let's disable these one by one. So here's the glow, disabled. Maybe gave us a frame. Here is the halation, And now that's disabled. That gave us a couple more frames, so now we're at 20. Here is the grain, and now that's disabled, and now we're getting a full real-time playback. But even when they're all enabled, I still think getting around 14 frames per second is completely workable. Last test I wanted to show you, but it's another important feature, in my opinion, that has been added to Resolve, and that is the auto transcription feature. Similar to the subtitle, but this is where you can actually generate a transcription from a clip itself and not from a timeline. We've got a 22-minute or almost 23-minute long clip, so I'm gonna right-click and come down to audio transcription and hit transcribe. Let me get my stopwatch going, reset, and go. That took about 2 minutes and 18 seconds. And here you go, here's your transcription. If your DaVinci Resolve workflows look anything like mine, then you can absolutely edit with the base M2 Pro Mac Mini. If you utilize the really intensive GPU-enabled effects in Resolve, you'll definitely run into some bottlenecks with the M2 Pro. And in that case, it may be worth considering jumping up to the Mac Studio Max. If you don't utilize those effects, or you don't use them very often, then you should be fine sticking with the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini. I don't have the ability to really compare all of the various models of MacBooks, Mac Studios, Mac Minis, etc. There's just way too many options on the market right now. But in my opinion, I think that the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini has to be one of the best value computers that you can get in the Mac world anyway. I also don't think it really makes a lot of sense to upgrade it in any way at all because of the Apple tax, that just the insane amount of money that Apple charges for what should be very inexpensive upgrades, like to the RAM or to the hard drive. Once you start adding on those marginal upgrades, in my opinion, now you're encroaching on what it would cost you just to get the base M2 Studio. If you're already looking at $2,000 for the M2 Pro Mac Mini, you might as well just get the Mac Studio because it's going to represent a much bigger increase in performance based on its much more powerful GPU. I also don't think it makes much sense to upgrade the storage because even though you're getting slightly bottleneck performance from these sort of generic USB 3.2 Gen 2 drives from the Thunderbolt ports on these Macs, the speeds that you're getting are still plenty fast to edit and work with all of the footage that you probably want to work with. Those few cases where we were getting red X's on the Resolve disk speed test represent use cases that I think the vast majority of people are not going to run into. And if you are running into them, then you're not looking at this computer in the first place. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. I'm not a computer review channel. I'm sure there's way more systematic ways to go about these comparisons. I think I have a relatively solid base of experience using both of these computers for the better part of 2023, and I just wanted to give you my feedback on how this computer stacks up and whether I think it's a good value.